let me tell you about the longest 17 hours of my life. I thought foster care was a long and miserable experience, but this book makes that seem like an enjoyable blip in time. There are births that are shorter than this novel, and preferable because at least you get a prize at the end of the birth. You get a baby. The only prize I get for reading this book is that I guess I get to write a podcast episode about it. Welcome back to the madness. My name is Erin, and today we're staring into the abyss, and staring back at us is The Devil and the Dark Water by Stuart Turton. This book is a whodunit mystery set on a boat. By no means the first book to do this, definitely not the last. The whodunit mystery is a subgenre we briefly mentioned in Scorched Grace because that book is also a whodunit, but I want to take a closer look at this. So according to Wikipedia, whodunit, spelled W-H-O-D-U-N-I-T, no spaces. This is a complex, plot-driven variation of detective fiction. Well, shit, what's detective fiction? That's actually an easier question to answer. It's quite literally fiction about a crime that a detective character has to solve. The era of detective fiction, where this subgenre thrived the most, occurred between World War I and World War II, with writers such as Agatha Christie and Josephine Tey. British writers were seeing more success with this genre, though there were Americans giving a more American take at this time in the height of detective fiction. This was also a female-dominated genre. The only constants in life truly are death, taxes, and women's love for murder. So whodunit mysteries have a distinct feature that's understood as the double narrative, two distinct stories that are being told at the same time. The two narratives are called the active narrative and the undertow narrative. The active narrative is the storyline of the present day. The detective is showing up to investigate the crime that's already occurred. The undertow narrative, that's the story that exists underneath the active narrative and is unveiled slowly through story progression. This is often like the crime that the detective is investigating. And look, I know, the double narrative as a phrase sounds really intimidating, but it is just the present-day detective solving the crime is one story, and the narrative that's discovered through the investigation as the second story. The interesting thing about this structure is that eventually, the detective, who typically begins as like an outsider of the investigation, gets caught up in the middle, and as they get closer to figuring out who did it, hey, that's the name of the genre. The detective becomes enveloped and often finds themselves in danger. A way to conceptualize how the detective's presence inherently involves them in the narrative they were merely investigating, a way to conceptualize this is through the observer effect, an important piece of quantum mechanics. I know, I'm making it real easy for you to understand, but just stick with me. The observer effect states that the presence of an observer causes a change in the observation. The thing we're looking at will behave differently depending on if we're looking at it or not. On a macro level, that seems ridiculous. But this is best seen on a micro scale when we're dealing with molecules and atoms and real tiny stuff. So the presence of other molecules will cause changes in molecules nearby. If we need the lights on to observe some molecules, they're going to react differently because now there are new light molecules interacting in the space. So what does all of this science have to do with this entanglement of a detective in a whodunit? Imagine you've committed a crime, or remember the crimes you've committed, and a detective shows up trying to figure out what happened. Your behaviors will change because you and your crime are now being observed. Maybe you're trying to play it cool, but the detective gets closer and closer to the answer. You have to decide if you do nothing and let yourself get caught, or decide to deal with the detective. Maybe your goal is to start framing someone else. Maybe it's to kill the detective off. Maybe make a break for it and run. Take a hostage and hope the detective will negotiate. The detective is the observer and you, the criminal, are the observation. Your behavior is now different because there's someone observing you. We see this happen a lot in whodunit mysteries when at the last act, the detective is now a participant in the undertow narrative, which is usually the narrative of the crime the detective set out to solve. Glass Onion is a good example where Benoit Blanc is brought there to participate in like this murder mystery party, but as people start to die for real, the antagonist tries to kill Blanc and his sidekick because if Blanc figures out what happened on this island, the antagonist will be ruined. The stakes have changed. And now Benoit Blanc, who had nothing to do with the crimes going on at this party, is now a part of it. Not all whodunits follow this structure of the double narrative, eventually entangling into one narrative as the detective and the criminals get closer to each other. But a lot of them do because it's interesting to see the detective face some kind of peril. It's cool to see the danger catch up to them, and that's where the mystery begins to meet thriller. So, if you're a regular on the reading circuit, you know that a lot of mysteries and thrillers get marketed as just quote-unquote mystery thrillers, so much that it feels like the same genre. The Devil in the Dark Water, the book we're going to talk about today, is marketed as a mystery thriller. However, there is a major distinction. Mysteries, and as a result whodunits, are usually stories about things that have already occurred. The events have already transpired, and our protagonist is on the hunt to uncover the mystery. The event might occur at the beginning of the novel, but we're not spending a very long time on it because the book is going to analyze later in great detail as the protagonist begins to put all of the pieces together. Thrillers, on the other hand, are stories told as the event is going on. So in theory, you could write a duology with one book being a thriller of the event as it goes down in real time, and the second book could be a whodunit mystery of the detective trying to figure it out. So we get a lot of books marketed as mystery thrillers because it's become the norm, but also because a lot of these novels want to both have the mystery to uncover, but also have a dangerous situation unfolding in real time that our protagonist and our supporting cast have to endure. A lot of mysteries have thriller elements in the way that most books have mystery elements. We expect a story about a detective solving a crime to end up caught in the middle of the danger, but the dangers are not the focus of the story. So every genre has classification elements, and these are the elements the genre needs to be considered a part of that genre. Romances need a happily ever after or happily ever after for now. Without that, it's just general fiction with romance elements. The mystery classification element is that there needs to be an investigation into a mystery, and the thriller classification element is that it must revolve around surviving a dangerous event. You might be thinking, Aaron, that's real broad, and you'd be correct. It's supposed to be. It's not supposed to be difficult to meet the requirements of a genre. Then, what's the difference between horror and thriller? Since you would think that horror is also about survival, this is also correct. The difference is that horror classification element is that it must intentionally seek to generate a sense of horror, fear, or unease. Usually this is via an antagonist, but sometimes it can be a situation that the characters find themselves in, or sometimes it's the protagonist that's terrifying. If you're confused, I'm gonna make it worse. We have these lines blurred further in video games. There's no thriller genre in video games, it's just called survival horror. A lot of games that have mystery as their central plot device tend to be in the horror genre. One of the best horror games in the 2010 decades is Until Dawn, a game that has a mystery the cast must investigate while also trying to survive dangers of the mountains in real time, while also trying not to get murdered by unfathomable monsters. Mystery, thriller, horror, a Frankenstein of genre. The fast and dirty to remember the distinctions between these three genres is that mysteries investigate, thrillers survive, horror terrifies. So, some of these stories get marketed as mystery thrillers because the entanglement of the double narrative is where we get the thriller, and that entanglement is a major aspect of the story structure. The transition from being observer to participant plays a significant role, rather than being a minor piece that's often relegated to the last act of the novel. If we're only having like a small, isolated section of our characters in peril, that's not necessarily the thriller genre, that's just a thriller element. The survival aspect has to take up a breadth of the novel to be considered in the thriller genre. Some of these novels have this happen almost directly after the setup when the observer becomes a participant. Others don't have that transition at all. We begin the story as both observer and participant of the mystery. The Devil in the Dark Water throws us into the thriller side of it fairly early. This novel is both about uncovering the mystery, yes, but we are also trying to survive a ghost story violently unfolding on the boat. So, we're trying to get what this undertone narrative is. At the same time, a ghost is showing up and ruining everybody's vacation. 0 stars. Do not recommend. As a writer, it's so fascinating to see all these variations in structure, especially in like the whodunits and the double narrative. I love seeing the way that the writers play with genre. Although unfortunately, I would not say Devil in the Dark Water is a shining example of this. Let's take a look at some of the other keys in a whodunit. So let's talk about the detective. The role of the detective is an iconic part of detective fiction. It's kind of in the name. Sherlock Holmes is probably the most famous example, but we've also got Hercule Poirot from Agatha Christie, Benoit Blanc from Knives Out, but also like the behavioral analysis unit from Criminal Minds, Sam and Dean from early Supernatural, Dawn and Charlie's team from Numbers. In video games, we have characters like Booker DeWitt from BioShock Infinite, Leon S. Kennedy and Claire Redfield from Resident Evil 2, Alan Wake in the Alan Wake series. While I am using the word detective, this is very much a loose term. We are playing loose and fast with this term. There doesn't have to be like the traditional idea of a detective, nor do they need to be a part of a genuine investigation. You know, when we talked about Scorched Grace, that detective role is filled by a nosy nun. We can understand the detective role as the person trying to uncover the undertow narrative, and the level of entanglement of the role and the undertow plot can change depending on who you choose as the detective. A cop is going to be far more detached to the plot than a family member of the victim, for example. The detective is firmly in the active narrative, the dual narrative structure. Over time, the undertow narrative can bleed into the present. It kind of has to for the detective to make an arrest. The crime in whodunits is typically a murder, but it can be any crime. The crime is going to be firmly in the undertow narrative, in the dual narrative structure. Eventually, the undertow narrative will bleed into the active narrative because someone has to be accused of the crime, but as the investigation unfolds, so too do we learn about the story that exists underneath the active narrative. Okay, I feel like I haven't been clear about this, so forgive me if I'm repeating stuff, but a book is only both a thriller and a mystery if the survival aspect is a major part of the story as much as the investigation is. The mere presence of an event that someone has to survive is just a thriller element. Whodunits tend to have a thriller element in the way that the detective might face danger, but it's not in the genre until the novel is also about their survival as well. Knives Out is a mystery with thriller elements, and Devil in the Dark Water is a mystery thriller. I keep saying that, like, you know, the detective ends up in danger at the end of the novel as they, like, make the accusations, and I feel like I'm confusing people with, like, thriller element versus part of the thriller genre, so I'm sorry if I'm confusing everyone. And I hope if I've repeated enough times that people will understand the nonsense that I'm spouting, or maybe I'm just mad. We're all mad here. Anyways, moving on to the clues. The clues. Because the defining characteristic of a whodunit is an event which the detective investigates, all we have left to piece that undertow narrative is the clues left behind. Objects, facts, witnesses, victims, confessions, it all plays a role into how the detective pieces the story together in the full picture. Now, a problem that can occur, which we're going to see today, is sometimes we spend the breadth of a novel investigating clues and witnesses that bring us nowhere, and when we do start reaching the clues that do matter, information is purposely withheld so we don't have a fighting chance at figuring things out before the dramatic twist and reveal. It's an intentional misdirection that can be frustrating for readers. What is the point of a 17-hour novel when the vast majority of the important information only shows up at the 16th hour? The criminal. Obviously, if we have a detective and a crime, we also need a criminal. In a traditional whodunit, it's plot-driven and the investigator is not connected to the drama of the undertow narrative in the dual narrative structure. A good example of this is the game Contradiction with Detective Jenks. He's just the guy who shows up to figure things out. The crime is not necessarily connected to him. It means that all of the narrative stuff is going to be found in the investigation, of trying to pin down motives and suspects. It's not just about figuring out who did it. Hey, that's the name of the genre. But we also want to know why and how. Despite the fact that the criminal doesn't play much of a role in the active narrative of the dual narrative structure, they should be the most important person in the book because the book is kind of about them and their crime. A spot where this aspect can struggle is what we saw in Scorched Grace, where we focus too much on the detective's backstory when the undertow narrative has nothing to do with her. So we have this problem now where we have three narratives going on: the active narrative, the undertow narrative, and the backstory of the detective. And I'm not saying that Sister Holiday's backstory in Scorched Grace doesn't matter, but if they're not connected to the undertow narrative, their backstory shouldn't be taking up that much space in the book. There are ways to get away with a detective having a deep backstory, and that's usually when the detective role is given to someone already in the undertone narrative or knows someone who is. Pretty Girls is told from the perspective of the victim's sisters. Gone Girl is told from the husband's point of view. The Last Thing He Told Me is narrated by the wife. It makes sense that we need to learn about these characters' histories because there's key information in that backstory. They're a part of the undertone narrative already out the gate. Devil in the Dark Water actually creates this general sense of anxiety and horror because we begin the story firmly in the active narrative with the majority of the cast detached from the undertone narrative. Moment by moment, it becomes apparent that everyone on the ship just happens to be connected to the undertone narrative with our narrator Arendt at the center of it. There's something truly haunting about the unrelated thread of terror slowly revealing itself to be connected to every passenger. It's one of the most impressive parts of the story. Let's talk about plot twists. Something we often see in stories with mystery elements is the reveal of who did it. Hey, that's the name of the genre. I don't know how many times I'm gonna keep doing that. It's usually the person you least expect. This is a natural part of storytelling. But sometimes a book will spend its read time on red herrings and coy misdirections and bring us into a twist and reveal, but because we spent all that book's read time on irrelevant plot points, we have nothing that actually proves the criminal is a criminal, and as a result, we have to sit through a monologue about how they did it and why, and we're supposed to clap because it's such a good twist. I'm told it's supposed to be good because the author said so. The plane is landing and we're being demanded to clap. The mastery of mystery is not leaving your readers clueless. It's by spinning a narrative that when you get to the reveal, all of the pieces suddenly click into place. You don't need that post-reveal monologue because the entire novel building up to that reveal holds all the information that that monologue would have, so to speak. We have the proof that the criminal is a criminal because we spent the whole novel unveiling that. And twists, look, they don't always have to be a fireworks show. It could be a piece of forged evidence, someone confessing who didn't commit the crime, a secret connection between two people. The cops could be bribed to shut the case down. It's hard for our detective characters to have meaningful investigations if the author is so terrified of the reader figuring out the twist before the reveal that they won't actually let the detectives discover anything until after the reveal. That's the problem we have with Scorched Grace. What then is the point of the book? And not to foreshadow, but what I ask you is the point of The Devil in the Dark Water. Now that we've primed ourselves with what a whodunit is, let's take a look at the synopsis of The Devil in the Dark Water. I just want to say, if I could sum up this book in one word, it would be overwhelming. Anyways, let's read. A murder on the high seas. A detective duo. A demon who may or may not exist. It's 1634 and Samuel Pepys, the world's greatest detective, is being transported to Amsterdam to be executed for a crime he may or may not have committed. Traveling with him is his loyal bodyguard, Arndt Hayes, who is determined to prove his friend innocent. But no sooner are they out to sea that devilry begins to blight the voyage. A twice-dead leper stalks the decks, strange symbols appears on the sails, livestock is slaughtered. And then 3 passengers are marked for death, including Samuel. Could a demon be responsible for their misfortunes? With Pepys imprisoned, only Arndt can solve a mystery that connects every passenger on board, a mystery that stretches back into their past and now threatens to sink the ship, killing everyone on board. The breathtaking new novel from Stuart Turton, author of the 7.5 Deaths of Evil in Hardcastle, winner of the Costa Best First Novel Award. I will say that I did enjoy reading 7.5 Deaths of Evil in Hardcastle, though it has rampant fat phobia issues. Now that I've read both of these books, I will say the author is not the best when it comes to writing characters of experiences he does not have. We will see this when we get to theme how Turton, much like Nathaniel Hawthorne, does not know how to write children, and so we end up with a very creepy, sagely young girl. The author also really struggled with feminism. But now, let's dive deeper into the synopsis. There's a lot of cool stuff going on here. A murder on the high seas, a detective duo, a demon who may or may not exist. This is our hook line. We follow the rule of threes by listing off the 3 most important parts of the novel: the setting, detectives, the potential criminal. There is a murder on the high seas, yes, but it's not really the focus of the story. The murder that is being referenced here actually takes place on the docks before the ship set sails, though I guess it's not as cool sounding as Murder on the High Seas. The detective and demon are accurate, though. It's 1634, and Samuel Pepys, the world's greatest detective, is being transported to Amsterdam to be executed for a crime he may or may not have committed. Traveling with him is his loyal bodyguard, Arndt Hayes, who is determined to prove his friend innocent. But no sooner are they out to sea that devilry begins to blight the voyage. A twice-dead leper stalks the deck. Strange symbols appear on the sails. Livestock is slaughtered. And then 3 passengers are marked for death, including Samuel. Could a demon be responsible for their misfortune? The idea of the world's greatest detective is something that only exists in fiction. This is not a dig or a criticism, it's just something important to know. But most importantly, I don't think Samuel is ever referenced as a detective. The era-appropriate term is thief-taker, which is an early concept of a private investigator. Detective is a term coined in the 1840s, that's when we first saw it in print. I don't know why we didn't put the word thief-taker in the synopsis, especially since it's such a cool sounding word. I suppose we do run into the problem of whether or not the audience will know thief-taker, but you can in the synopsis just explain it to the readers, you know? It's 1634 and Samuel Pepys, the thief-taker who has solved every criminal case he's ever worked on, is being transported to Amsterdam. Yeah, it's more words, but we're able to understand that that a thief-taker is an investigator of some kind. The crimes alleged against Samuel are irrelevant. At first, I was really impressed that Samuel being in the brig meant the thief-taker's muscle bodyguard Arndt has to solve the crime, but it's not as important as the synopsis will lead you to believe. While Arndt is determined to prove Samuel's innocence, that's not what the novel is about. Arndt makes some inquiries, but he gets stonewalled almost every time. The twice-dead leper is the murder that the hook is referring to. I suppose it technically happens again on deck on the ship, which is why he's the twice-dead leper. But his iconic death is the one on the docks. We've also got some promises of things to come to help build up the mystery, the symbols on the flag, the slaughtered animals. These are promises that are delivered on, so that's good. Now, the synopsis says 3 characters are marked for death, including Samuel, and that is a bold-faced lie. No one's really marked. The devilry in question tries to make a deal with everyone on the ship, and I think that's what it's referencing. It could also be referencing that in the mythology of the devil creature, there are these 3 unholy miracles being performed, so it might be that. And this is a nitpick, but I wish the novel would pick a lane with its wordage. Is it a devil or a demon? Pick one. With Pepys imprisoned, only Arndt can solve a mystery that connects every passenger on board. A mystery that stretches back into their past and now threatens to sink the ship, killing everyone on board. I thought this was the coolest part of the novel up until the twist and reveal. I thought it was cool, like, the bodyguard has to solve it because the thief-taker is unable to. We also get our first hint that this is more than just a detached mystery. It's connected to Samuel and Arndt, and yes, this mystery does in fact almost get everyone killed. This title is filled with word groups that I love, religious language and water language. Unfortunately, this book is not filled with other things I love. It's a good title, it sets the stage and the tone, a murder mystery set on the ship with devilry afoot. The thing that holds me back from the title is that I was never really wondering what the dark water meant, so when there's like this quote-unquote reveal that is like the dark water is a colloquialism for the soul, like a term the sailors use in the novel, it feels like it was supposed to be a significant reveal, but it's only said once, and I think it would have been more impactful if we heard it in passing and then got the explanation later, so that way it actually feels like a part of the world rather than this thing we're just supposed to believe because the author told us. I still really like the title. It connects the major question to the book, which asks, is Old Tom really possessing people, or is it a grand conspiracy? You've made it to intermission! Congratulations! Go get your drink, use the bathroom, stop idling at the green light, and go! That's right, you're getting road rage in your podcast. Abandon all hope, all ye who enter here. This is a critical analysis, so not only will everything be spoiled in this book, it will be spoiled in great detail. Stop and read the book now if you wish to experience The Devil in the Dark Water unburdened by spoilers. But for those of you sticking around, buckle up because we're going to be treading water for 17 hours. Did I mention that this audiobook was 17 hours? As in 10 and 7 more? Oh my god, mark your calendars. It's finally a time where I need to cover the plot first in my list of things to talk about. We will never experience this again. This book, much like me, is overwhelming. There is so much going on, it's so easy to lose track of stuff. Sometimes you can make this work in a novel. Ironically, Turton has pulled this off in 7.5 Deaths of Evil and Hardcastle, but much like Supermassive Games trying and failing to recapture the lightning in the bottle that was Until Dawn, Stephen Turton is likewise in an uphill battle trying to recreate the same success as 7.5 Deaths. I did hear that The Last Murder at the End of the World is better than The Devil in the Dark Water, but it is rated slightly lower than this book, but The Devil is also rated higher than 7 Deaths. So do with those numbers what you will. Ratings are kind of meaningless to me. They don't tend to indicate quality, they really indicate popularity. So anyways, this book is strangled in misdirection. We are constantly being pushed around the ship. It takes so long to achieve any meaningful progress, and worst of all, this story is intentionally designed to be unsolvable by the reader. There are key pieces of information that simply are not available, and without them there's no way to suspect what's actually going on. I still can't tell you how Arendt solved the case in specifics because it's so overwhelmingly all over the place. So there's the narrative we experience through the majority of the novel, and then the story of what actually happened. You might be thinking, isn't that the active narrative and the undertow narrative, which you just spent like 30 minutes explaining to us? And you would be wrong. There's actually 3 timelines going on. The active narrative, the irrelevant investigation narrative, and the undertow narrative. While the undertow narrative does poke out a handful of times throughout the novel, the majority of this novel is focusing on this irrelevant investigation into stuff that I promise you genuinely does not matter to understand what was actually going on in the undertow narrative. The active investigation goes like this. A leper shows up on the docks as a ship leaving for Amsterdam is boarding its passengers. The leper curses the ship, dies by fire. It rattles some passengers, but the rest don't care. And the leper is seen later on the ship by Sarah, the governor general's wife. She's also one of our narrators. And after he shows up the second time and dies the second time, this ghost story starts to unfold. When he shows up the second time, they are already, like, in the water and there's no way of turning back. The devil in question goes by Old Tom and is believed he can give you your heart's desires in exchange for favors, and as a result, witch hunters associated with a church all across Europe try to destroy Old Tom, and the last living witch hunter is on the ship with his assistant. Remember this assistant. Put that in your back pocket. Her name is Isabel. So the passengers are tempted with a promise. People die like the witch hunter and Han, the governor general, some livestock. It's believed that after, like, these 3 unholy miracles, the one who made pact with Old Tom will slaughter the ones who didn't. Something called the Folly is also stolen, and that takes up a large portion of the investigation. Is it important? Not really. We understand that it has to be some kind of navigational device. It's worth its weight in gold. Invented by, I'm pretty sure it's Leah, the daughter who may or may not be a teenager. She's General Governor Han's daughter. Her age is somewhat ambiguous. Everything in the story must serve a purpose, and truly this whole theft of the Folly reads like page filler and misdirection from what's actually going on. We don't get a clear picture of what it is, why it's here, why it's so valuable. Sarah, the general governor's wife, believes her husband is selling it to this esoteric group that I think runs the East Trading India Company, but it's also suggested he's turning over Samuel Pipps. Remember, Samuel Pipps got arrested, and he's turning over Samuel to secure this position? I don't fucking know. Another plot point that's drawn out longer than the lazy drag of a chain smoker's cigarette is the stuff about the twice-dead leper. He is revealed to be the carpenter on the ship. That's actually a good reveal, because it means we can have an investigation on the ship about who this guy is. The issue is that the twice-dead leper said something in a foreign language, and Arendt is trying to figure out what it is, and the only guy who knows anything is the boatswain. He's basically like this guy that all the sailors are terrified of, and he allegedly keeps them all in line. This guy is a terrible person. He cuts the tongue out of the twice-dead leper. He beats up a kid. He's just like the worst, but he's the only guy who knows the language. On the ship, there's this class division between sailors, soldiers, and citizens, and the sailors won't communicate with the soldiers due to them being seen as bootlickers or something like that. It feels very contrived for how the sailors won't cooperate with the investigation, but I'll take personal taste on that. We spend so much time trying to figure out what this foreign language word means, and it ends up meaning trap, which kind of alludes to the grand conspiracy of what the novel is doing. But like, oh my god, you spend so much time trying to figure out what this word is, and then like, when it finally clicks for Arendt, he's just like, I know what it is, and then he doesn't tell us. We have to keep waiting. Oh my god. And let's not forget that during all of this, we learn that Governor General Han is a wife beater. His wife, Sarah's trying to leave him. The wife's best friend, Crushy, is his mistress, and I think Sarah is aware of it. There's also a woman on board who no one has seen, who might be under a false name, who also ends up being the mistress, Crushy, who is also somebody else, but we'll get into that later. There's also a witch hunter's assistant who's pregnant, and oh yeah, the witch hunter is murdered at one point. He's found accidentally. No one notices he's gone. There's no intentional search. We just kind of trip into his corpse. Arndt kicks the shit out of the boatswain, at first to throw the fight so the boatswain looks good in front of the crew so as to maintain control of them. In exchange, Arndt was going to get information about the foreign word that he doesn't understand, but then the boatswain just randomly decides to try and kill Arndt. Leah, the daughter, makes an exact replica of the ship and marks where she thinks the carpenter and the first mate created smuggler holds. An altar to the devil Old Tom is made in the cargo hold, and it keeps getting put back up every time it gets torn down. The mistress of the General Governor Krejci has got a dead husband who is also a witch hunter. The ship is being brought to this island train for some reason that isn't very clear. The guard captain gets flogged for no reason. And oh, the sailing ships has 7 other ships sailing with them, and then the 8th one shows up, and it's called the 8th Lantern, and it attacks the ship a couple of times. And also there's this book that details everything that's happened on the ship, including the island the ship is being brought to. And the reason why the ship doesn't turn around and go home is because this is a capitalistic hellscape and the East India Trading Company refuses to hurt their bottom line. Are you overwhelmed yet? And we haven't even talked about Arendt's dad. Now that we're all nice and properly overloaded, let's talk about the undertow narrative. The story that's happening underneath the active narrative. A vast majority of this information comes from the 16th hour and 17th hour of the novel. We get bits and pieces throughout the novel, but emphasis on bits and pieces. We've got a belt buckle of an entire outfit's worth of information. So let's talk about capitalism, my lords and germs. We begin with Arendt's grandfather, a man we think is nice, but's like actually a monster, who orders the death of Arendt's dad. Dick move, I know. Arendt is with his dad at the time, and Arendt got like so violent with the assassin that Arendt nearly drowned. And like during this, he gets like cut on his arm, but he thinks it's like this actual that he's been marked. He was very traumatized by this. He has no real memories except for stumbling out of the woods without his father. And then Arendt carves these marks in the mark that is on his hand into the walls of his village, and it causes a moral panic about devilry. And the person blamed is a beggar named Old Tom. Hey, that's the name of the devil attacking the ship. All over Europe, the mark of Old Tom appears, and witch hunters affiliated with the church are dispatched to eliminate it. It is believed that Old Tom possesses people after they make the deal, so the witch hunters show up, find the possessed person, and violently cleanse the town of evil, usually by killing that person, and then are rewarded by fighting the devil and move on to the next case. Given that this plot was intentionally written to be impossible to solve, I'm not gonna hide this information, I'ma just say it. Han's mistress, Krejci, is Samuel Pips's sister, and both of them were victimized by Old Tom accusations. I should also mention Krejci and Sarah are like besties. Anyways, Krejci sought revenge by seducing and killing witch hunters, but accidentally fell in love with one named Peter. He is killed eventually. But Krejci manages to get key information from him, which is that Old Tom isn't real and is just a capitalistic grift. Basically, a witch hunter in need of cash would make the Old Tom accusation, make sure that the mark showed up everywhere, and after killing the allegedly possessed, the witch hunters would inherit their riches. They are the original grifters. Krejci and Samuel plan to destroy this witch hunting order and everyone associated with this grift, including Han, the Governor General. So they invite everyone they want to kill on the ship, mostly just Han and the last witch hunter. When Old Tom shows up, quote unquote, and promises great riches to people, the deal that he tries to strike is to kill Han, which does happen. Han is killed with like a stick was poked down from the floor above him, and then Krejci places a dagger in his heart post-mortem to make it seem like he was stabbed with this Oh my god, I forgot about Arendt getting kidnapped and watching the boatswain get murdered. Okay, it's only important because the twice dead leper does it. The carpenter, he's dead. And since he's actually dead, Samuel dresses up as the leper on the boat. And in this murder scene, Samuel as the leper shows Arendt this dagger that's eventually found in the heart of Han. Moving on. Arryn thinks the dagger's too flimsy to have, like, dealt the killing blow, and that means it was placed post-mortem, which means it had to be a first responder who was involved with Han's death. Han is also afraid of the dark and sleeps with a candle lit, which is very dangerous, but the candle is snuffed out, and it could only have been snuffed out by someone in the room, again pointing to a first responder to Han's death, so it really could only have been Cressy. All of the devilry ends up being, like, tricks pulled off by Cressy and Samuel, everything from the whispering to everyone's ears to killing Han to that mysterious 8th ship following the boat. So let's get to that dramatic twist and reveal. Old Tom is leading the ship towards an island, and the ship crashes when it arrives. People wash ashore, anarchy arises, a deal is set up, like, for a brothel to satisfy the men, but Arryn and his, like, friends, they plan to get as many people out of harm's way before, like, that brothel deal goes into effect. As people begin to divide, the Witch Hunter's apprentice Isabel, remember, I told you to remember Isabel, spikes everyone's drink with the sleeping tonic. Oh my god, I forgot about the sleeping tonic. Okay, Sarah, the wife of Han, she's an herbalist who has, like, a potent sleeping tonic, and it gets used a lot in the story. One drop, someone's down for the count for the rest of the night. It comes up a lot anyways, so Isabel drugs everyone, ties them up, threatens to burn old Tom out of everyone, and begins with Sarah's daughter Leah, who is, I think, a child. And just as Leah's dress catches fire, Cressy admits to everything. Sarah and Arndt revealed that they figured it out, but needed a confession. And what follows is a very long monologue I have summarized above. The cringiest part is that Leah keeps often asking, like, how did you do this? And why did you do that? And it's written like a childlike curiosity, but it's just to break up the monologue to make it feel more natural, and dialogue is super cringe. The plane has landed and we're being demanded to clap. The ending is hysterically absurd. So all of this happens, and Sarah and Arndt ask Cressy and Samuel, what if we used the old Tom grift for good instead? And everyone agrees, and that's how the book ends. So Samuel and Cressy's body count is somewhere in the 50s at this point, with the ship crashing, killing so many people. I don't really feel bad for, like, the witch hunters and the boatswain or Han, but a lot of innocent people did die. The Carpenter was set on fire by them to cover their tracks and create a monster back from the dead, and the Carpenter didn't know he was going to die in that moment. In addition to that, they created a situation in which the women were going to be forced into sex slavery to satisfy the men when everyone crashed on that island, so I would like to add sex trafficking to their list of crimes. All of these people are going to be scarred for life, so I'd like to add terrorism, and since Leah is a child and she nearly got burned alive, I would also say that child endangerment should be added to this list. Were these all crimes in the era? No, absolutely not. However, it's important for us to understand just how much suffering these two caused, only for it to end with, how about we use the grift for good instead, and everyone forgives them? What? There's vigilante sociopaths who used a grifter conspiracy to hide their own wanton murders. Oh my god, I forgot about the rosary beads. Okay, we find Arryn's dance rosary among the slaughtered animals. I think Samuel brought it to scare the shit out of everyone. Oh, and Samuel only hired Arryn because he knew he was going to need him to pull this off. Oh, and also there was apparently, like, some case that Samuel let Arndt take the lead on that almost led to a false conviction, but actually Samuel bribed the guy who did it in exchange for a lot of wealth to fund this plan, so he emotionally abused his closest best friend in order to get away with all of this, and Arndt is just fine with this? Why is everyone just fine with this? And I must repeat, all of this information is revealed really only in the 16th and 17th hour of this novel. The most we get of the undertow narrative and the breadth of the book is the mythos of Old Tom, what actually happened to Arryn's father. That's good. I'll give the book its flowers when it's deserved. Arryn's narrative, for the most part, is threaded very well throughout the story. Everything else is so crammed. So the prose is really well written in that I never felt too lost as to what's going on, and the information was easy to understand. I think the most upsetting part of this book is that it was entertaining. I genuinely was having a good time up until I realized the majority of the novel didn't matter, and the last 2 hours were a cram of reveals. The book has good readability, there's just a lot of structural issues. Something I really don't like in storytelling is when writing intentionally and deliberately keeps readers in the dark. There are ways to get away with this, and I've seen books that I love that do manage to get away with it, but most of the time it does annoy me, and Devil in the Dark Water does it. What do I mean by this? So when characters are having conversations about something and the narration takes over to hide details of that conversation. So let's say two characters are planning a heist, and instead of getting a scene of the two characters planning the heist, we get this in the narration, which is, I tell them the plan, and then we completely move on from the heist. Clearly what's going on here in these instances is that the author wants to keep us in the dark so we experience whatever they're trying to hide with fresh eyes, but this just annoys me. Writing is a balancing act, and one of the things a writer has to deal with is being coy with the reader about information. The longer you hold out on a reveal, the more frustrated a reader is going to be, but if you reveal too early, the reader might feel like the novel is moving too fast. When we get these obvious moments of the author playing coy with these coy lines, the I tell them the plan and the I know who did it, followed by no other context, it feels like the author wrote themselves into a corner that they didn't really know how to get out of, and they didn't want to reveal something until it's happening, but it would not make sense for the characters in the story to not know what's going on. And when you want the characters to know but not the reader, you end up with this problem. I personally feel like if we end up in a spot where a coy line is used, we should actually just place a small reveal here because it indicates we're reaching a point in the novel where we cannot keep playing coy with the information. So Arendt figures out who was behind the whole plot, and we enter the chapter with this like, I know who did it, and then no other context. It's clear that Arendt knows who did it, but we the reader don't get to know. So when we transition to the next scene of Isabel drugging and deciding to burn old Tom out of everyone, we think Isabel's crazy. But it turns out everyone was in the know, and it was just a trick to get Cressy to admit she was behind it. I understand the vision, okay? I understand it. The author wanted us to fear for Leah's life. He wanted us to actually think Isabel was crazy. I get it, I do. But I don't think it worked regardless. I think we might have had more success if we had a smaller reveal at the point where the author plays coy. We don't need Arendt to say, oh, I think Cressy did it. But we can clue in the readers in a more subtle way. Arendt figures out it's Cressy because someone had to snuff out the candle, and it had to be a first responder to the Governor General when he died. So I think instead of playing coy, we could have had Arendt say that it had to be one of the first people in the room when the Governor General died. It would still point to Cressy, but there was more than one first responder. Isabel can still go crazy and burn everyone alive and get the Cressy reveal. I'm not sure if this would have perfectly solved it. This feels like duct tape on a building that's not structurally sound, but I think the explicit coyness indicates that a reveal had to go here. Something's got to give. I know that I sound like a broken record bringing up the fact that this is a 17-hour audiobook and a 480-page book, but it's time to talk about why this hurt the novel. The longer your novel is, the more information a reader's going to forget. It's really hard to participate in a mystery when a novel is so long because it's hard to remember key information, especially if the author never reminds you of those key pieces. Usually when it comes to long mysteries, I understand I'm kind of there for the ride because there's no way I'm going to remember all the small details with so much going on, but it also doesn't help the author is intentionally making the mystery impossible to solve. With really long novels, you also just don't care about all the plot lines as much as others, since most long novels tend to have multiple storylines going on at the same time. I liked The Covenant of Water, but I definitely did not care about Rune. I often forgot who he was and why he was important. I really only cared about the main family. Likewise in Devil in the Dark Water, I didn't care much about the witch hunter and his assistant Isabel. There's just so much going on. When the witch hunter was found dead, I didn't feel anything about him. It's not like we were searching for him, and I forgot his name. Quite literally no impact on me whatsoever. This is also just a case with books with a lot of characters. There are just some you don't care about more than others. I don't think that means we should be limiting our cast. I love writing books with large casts, but it's just something you have to accept as a writer. I certainly have. Larger casts also tend to have death fodder, and I feel like all the deaths in Devil in the Dark Water were very safe deaths. They're always people we don't care about, or people we think deserve to die, or people who only show up every now and then and so we don't really feel the impact of their death. Storytelling needs to be much braver to kill important characters in good narrative ways. I want to care about the people who die, and I want them to die in ways that are more than just shock value. Another issue this novel has to contend with is that we have multiple perspectives. It's much harder to keep secrets and do reveals when we are receiving the story through multiple people. When we have many perspectives, there's a much more objective view of the world because we can see it from different angles. If we only have one narrator, we're limited in information, and that makes reveals much easier to pull off and much more impactful. For example, Arendt and the Governor General Han are really close. Arendt sees him like an uncle, but Arendt thinks that Governor General is like a kind and just man, but we know from Sarah's perspective that he's a wife-beater and truly scum of the earth. Arendt's denial and opinions don't feel as impactful because we have concrete evidence of this man being the absolute worst. I don't really care that Arendt is struggling to accept this because the reader already knows that he's a bad person. Cressy being the general's mistress, it doesn't feel very impactful. We get it from either her or the Governor General's perspective. It's not something that we learn from Arendt, the guy who plays the role of the detective in the story, and I can't even tell you when he figures it out. There are ways to do mysteries with multiple perspectives, and in all fairness, The Devil in the Dark Water does it partially successfully. Sarah and Arendt work well together in their perspectives because they are working together, but every other perspective felt like a waste of time. Miracle Creek by Angie Kim does multi-perspective mystery really well, but the success came from her having a different intention with the novel. Miracle Creek isn't really about one guy trying to figure out who did it, it's about a collection of terrible people all trying to get through a court case without their sins and crimes being revealed. So all their secrets being revealed across many people work because everyone is trying to hide stuff from everyone else. It also doesn't work in Devil in the Dark Water because we've got two people trying to solve the mystery, so having these other perspectives with these reveals feels like a waste of time. I'd rather have a scene of Arendt or Sarah making the discovery rather than the reader having dramatic irony that they definitely are going to forget. This book, it's so funny. It shows us all the wrong information and hides all the important stuff. So aside from our struggle through perspectives, the voice and dialogue are natural and entertaining. No complaints here. The less I have to say about this, the better, because it shouldn't be something that I'm aware of. I don't know how much I have to say about the characterization, because this book is so overwhelming when it comes to the characters. We have so many of them. Overall, the characterization is interesting and well thought out. The major problem is when we get to the very end when Sarah and Arendt convince Cressy and Samuel to use Old Tom as a force of good. It just doesn't make sense and doesn't really fit any of the characters. This sense of justice propelling Arendt and Sarah to discover what was going on is completely abandoned when it turns out it's their closest friends as the culprits. I suppose justice is irrelevant when it's your friends committing the crimes. I found the witch hunter a forgettable character. I had to Google the Governor General's name like 4 times when writing this script. Despite that, the Governor General is really the only character that I'm gonna go in depth and kind of talk about, because like I could go character by character, but I don't think you really want to sit and listen to a 3-hour podcast. So the Governor General, John Han, thanks Wikipedia, is a very powerful guy who is connected to the Old Tom Grift conspiracy, and the thing I love about him the most is that he has this obsession of wanting to watch people he screw over suffer. He collects conquests like trophies and thrives in making people miserable when he himself benefits. There are a few characters on the boat, Sarah included, that are a result of this. One of Han's guards is also someone he once defeated, but someone he keeps close because he loves the fact that he beat them. Han seeks only to social climb, to get money and power and more control, and the only thing standing in his way is this obsession. It does ultimately end up at his downfall because Han doesn't love killing people, which you'd think is an admirable trait, but his dislike of it stems from the fact that he can't thrive in the conquest with dead people. Not so great. But it means he keeps a lot of his enemies alive, and which means he has a lot of enemies, Cressy and Samuel among them. It is his undoing, and it is the coolest part of the novel. He is generally a good villain, and in that he is doing some villainous things. He's abusive and crass. He plays favorites and has no remorse over the harm he's caused for others. He trusts Arendt to make discoveries about this ghost story, but ultimately tries to take over when he thinks Arendt doesn't do a good job. He's cruel without cause and only ever prioritizes himself. I think because there's so much going on, it's really hard to keep up with the characterization, which is a problem with every character in the plot, but when I sit and think about Han, I really do love this take on pride. It's very impressive. So there's 2 parts of atmosphere, believability and emotional atmosphere. I want to believe the world I'm reading, and I want to feel it too. This book does seem relatively well researched. I bought into most of it. I'm not sure if the crews of these ships were as vicious as the book portrays it, or if that's just supposed to be unique to this ship. It works either way. This is just like the first passenger ship I've ever read where the crew has to be like separated from the guests in fear of the crew assaulting or murdering any of the guests on the ship. There's also this class division between citizens, crew, and guards. The crew won't work with the guards in fear of coming off disloyal to the crew. This is like the first time I've read a book that does that. I can't say for sure how accurate it is, but the book sold me on it, and that's all that matters. You could make an argument that this is just specific to this boat and not all East India Trading Company ships entirely. Something that never got mentioned, which I was shocked about, was how women are perceived as bad luck on a boat because women would distract the crew, though paradoxically naked women were seen as good luck, which is why a lot of mastheads on boats were often naked women. This never got brought up once, and I found it weird because this is like one of those fun facts that every kid learns because Pirates of the Caribbean. The emotional atmosphere was stunted for me. It was hard to feel most of the characters with consideration of how convoluted the plot was. I feel bad that Arndt was emotionally abused by Samuel, but it's hard to keep that feeling when Arndt himself doesn't seem to care. I wanted Sarah and Leah to make it away from Han because it was an abusive situation, but for everyone else, I don't know, I just didn't feel that much about him. I didn't care that the witch hunter died, especially when I didn't know he was missing until his body showed up. Alright, Lords and Germs, we've arrived to theme. I'm sure if you've read this book, you're probably wondering why I skipped over some things about Leah and Sarah, and that's because we're going to talk about them in this section. Unfortunately, this book is giving women written by men energy. So something that the author attempts to make is that this is like a little bit of a feminist piece. Sarah and Leah are trying to have more control over their lives, feeling trapped by Han, Sarah's husband, and Leah's father. Sarah's attempt at feminism feels rooted in the time. She's just trying to escape her husband through whatever methods are available. She doesn't come off as anachronistic. There are certainly, a lot of options for her because she is a rich woman. Leah is more ambiguous. At times, she seems like a 10-year-old, sometimes a teenager, sometimes like a young adult, maybe 20 years old. It's hard to place her age. Something that gets brought up a lot is that Leah is smart and gifted, and because of that, people might think it's sorcery or witchcraft, so Leah has to be hidden away. I don't really buy much into this. In pre-modern Europe, we do have like the witch trials, which were going on in this era, but don't let the movies fool you. The women who are typically accused of witchcraft were often older women and widows. That's why a lot of witch imagery is like the old hag, the old woman. I'm sure that there were some cases of people genuinely believing in witchcraft, but a lot of witch trials were grifts. A lot of it came down to someone wanting to take other people's possessions and land, and a way to do that was to eliminate them by an accusation of witchcraft. That's why some of the tests to determine which kill the accused no matter what. If you drown, you're innocent. If you float, you're a witch, and you'll be executed for them. This is also a thing that majorly affected women, but men were also affected. More men were killed in the witch trials in Russia than women, for example. Knowing that the witch trials cannot be divided from capitalism, I just find it hard to believe that a bunch of people, especially when they're not in Europe, would just assume that an intelligent young girl is automatically a witch. Like, it could be true, but I would need data to prove that before I believe it. At the end of the novel, Sarah is a widow who will inherit her husband's wealth, and so she should actually be very worried about being accused of witchcraft, especially since she's sailing to the European area, because she is now like the prime target demographic of like the women who would be accused of witchcraft. A rich, husbandless widow. Leah as the girl genius just also doesn't work because I couldn't really ever place her age, and the stuff she does is just quote-unquote smart girl stuff. She can just make a replica of a ship and accurately predict where smuggler holds would be. She made this technology called the Folly everyone is after, but we don't really know what it does. She feels like a caricature of intelligence, which is only intensified with the hysteria of her being accused of witchcraft just because she's smart. And also, as a woman, this is not the storytelling I'm looking for. This ain't it. This book really isn't about feminism. And so these feminist angles just feel like a waste of time. I wanted to focus on the conspiracy, the grift. Sarah's struggle for independence works because it gives her motivation, but Leah felt like a distraction, and I hate to say it, unnecessary. Because it's not like anything she does actually matters in the novel. Her technology gets stolen, that everyone sees as valuable. It's a red herring and completely unrelated to the grift. Her making a replica of the ship to find the smuggler holds does help Arndt find the dead witch hunter, but they don't really find much in those smuggler holds. None of this helps get them closer to finding out why old Tom wants Han dead, and then later figuring out who actually killed Han. In terms of other themes, I don't really know what to tell you. This book isn't really saying anything because the theme is assassinated by the end of the novel. Corruption is bad, but doing a grift for the sake of good is totally okay. Sacrificing people's lives for your revenge is okay as long as the ends justify the means. Emotional abuse is okay, but physical abuse is not. It's a whole lot of nothing going on here because of the ending. The book is about terrible people doing terrible things with their friends enabling them. This is my biggest frustration about the book, because, books are always trying to say something, otherwise why write a book? And it's disappointing when the only thing of substance is this feminist angle, which isn't even the main subject of the novel, because everything else just falls apart. If you aim to tell a story about the way the powerful can turn a ghost story into a grift, you are ultimately saying something about the upper class, about conspiracies and grifters. But we can't really say this book is condemning them because the main cast decide to use the grift for good, which, let's be honest, that's not going to work out well. If you work with people who think murder is okay, you are going to spend your life digging other people's graves. I think the worst part of this novel is I was going to rate it real high until we got to that ending. Truly the definition of tripping right at the finish line. Because the story is entertaining, it's just disappointing that a majority of it just didn't matter. If you're case studying this novel, I think the thing you would be looking for is to look at how the themes get assassinated at the end of the novel. Take a look at the way the novel doesn't really do any planting work, resulting in a very long monologue about how the crime was pulled off in the last hours of the novel. Look at Leah and the way that she is written to be a caricature of intelligence, and more importantly, how everything connected to Leah's character doesn't seem to matter. More important, notice how this novel makes discovering certain information impossible, like how Crezia and Sam are siblings, and the way the author plays coy with information so that he gets his twist and reveal exactly the way he wants at the expense of the reader. But on the brighter side, I think the antagonist of this novel is really good. It's a really good way to write Pride. The conspiracy of Old Tom being a grift is fascinating and was undeniably the most entertaining part of the story. I know it isn't awesome for me to be recommending this book out as a cautionary tale, but sometimes it's easier for writers to see how they don't want to write more than how they do. I myself am one of those writers. I want to thank Stuart Turton for writing this book. Clearly it was a labor of love. Even though I'm very critical of this book today, it bears reminding that there are thousands of people who loved this book, and I'm glad that this book can find its audience. I am just not a part of it. Art is subjective, and asserting any objectivity onto it is a waste of time. Everyone wants to read a good book, but we all have different ideas of what a good book is. So, whether you loved or hated this one, let me know in the comments. I would love to hear your interpretations. That's it for today. The madness has ended, and you can go in peace.